She stood at the very edge of the platform, the sunlight catching the tiny droplets of water clinging to her wetsuit. Her lips curved into a smile, not the kind you force for a crowd, but the kind that says, I know this animal. I trust him with my life. Beneath her feet, the pool shimmered like glass, its deep blue hiding a shadow that moved with quiet, deliberate grace. The crowd leaned forward, children pressing their hands against the glass, holding their breath as if they sensed something important was about to happen. In the stillness, the Orca surfaced, black and white against the blue, his massive head breaking the water just inches from her toes. Their eyes met, hers, warm and full of affection, his, unreadable, dark as the depths below. 4 years, they had danced this delicate choreography together, trainer and titan, beauty and power. And now, in these final minutes, the stage was set for the moment that would define them both forever. From the bleachers came a whistle of admiration, the sharp pop of a camera shutter. Somewhere in the back row, a father whispered to his son about the trust between human and whale. But trust is a fragile thing. It's invisible, weightless, and when it breaks without warning. The Orca's body shifted beneath the surface, a slow, serpentine movement that went unnoticed by most. Only the most trained eyes might have seen the change. The subtle tilt of the head, the lowering of the dorsal fin, the way he no longer held himself in the familiar, eager posture. Something had shifted, and the water seemed to know it. Jessica took one small step forward, her toes curling over the edge of the platform, the smile never leaving her face. She raised her hand, a silent cue she had given thousands of times before. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The Orca floated in place, motionless, as if weighing a decision that no one else could understand. Then, with a gentle flick of his tail, he closed the distance between them. She crouched down, fingertips brushing the smooth curve of his head. A moment of connection, one that drew gasps from the crowd, and then he sank back beneath the surface, vanishing into the blue. The next time he rose, the world would never be the same. Stay with me. The truth is far more chilling than you've heard. The morning began like any other, calm, sunlit, and full of routine. The marine park was still waking up when Jessica arrived, the sound of her footsteps echoing along the damp concrete paths. In one hand, she carried her coffee, in the other, a small cooler of fish for the day's first feeding. She greeted the early shift workers with the same warm smile she would give the crowd later, her voice light and easy as she exchanged bits of gossip and plans for the evening. Steam from her cup curled upward in the cool air, carrying with it the comforting scent of roasted beans, mixing with a faint tang of seawater. Inside the holding pool, the Orca glided in slow, lazy circles, a dark shape moving against the pale turquoise walls. Jessica leaned over the edge, tossing him his first meal of the day. The fish slapped the water's surface and disappeared in an instant. He surfaced a moment later, exhaling with a sharp, powerful burst, and she laughed at the spray that dotted her face. They had done this every morning for years. It was a ritual, a moment before the crowds and the music, before the whistles and applause. Here, in the quiet, they were just two creatures who knew each other better than anyone else. Or so she believed. But today, there was something in his movement she couldn't quite name. He turned his head slowly away from her touch, a small, almost imperceptible motion that broke the pattern she knew by heart. His dorsal fin cut through the surface, then slipped below again, leaving a ripple that spread out toward the pool's edge. A fellow trainer passing by noticed it too. "He's restless," he murmured, keeping his eyes on the water. Jessica brushed it off with a smile. "He's just waking up," she said, though she lingered a moment longer, watching the way he moved. The rest of the morning unfolded as it always did. Costumes checked, sound systems tested, the scent of fresh popcorn drifting from the concessions. Guests began to arrive in clusters, their chatter building into the familiar hum that filled the park on busy days. Somewhere, a seagull cried overhead, circling the pool as if it too was waiting for the show. From a distance, everything seemed perfect. But in the water, a shadow kept circling, each pass a little faster than the one before. The first crack in their perfect bond had just appeared. Long before the crowds, the lights and the fame, Jessica Radcliffe was just a girl from a small coastal town, staring out at the ocean and dreaming. Her fascination with the sea began before she could even read. Her mother liked to tell the story of how, at the age of 4, Jessica wandered away at the beach and was found ankle-deep in the surf, staring fixedly at a pod of dolphins leaping just beyond the breakers. She didn't cry when they pulled her away, she just kept smiling and pointing, as if she already knew where she belonged. By the time she was 7, her bedroom walls were covered with posters of whales. Books about marine life stacked high on her nightstand, some well beyond her reading level, but she studied them anyway, tracing her fingers over the glossy photographs of orcas in the wild. She learned their names, their patterns, the differences between the pods. Where other children played make-believe games, Jessica trained her stuffed animals in the backyard, giving them imaginary fish when they performed tricks. Her first encounter with a live orca happened on her 8th birthday. Her parents saved for months to take her to a marine park several hours away. She remembered stepping through the gates, the scent of salt water and sunscreen mingling in the air, the hum of thousands of visitors, and then, there he was. Massive, powerful, graceful. The orca burst from the water in a perfect arc, crashing down in a plume of white spray. Jessica's jaw dropped. She didn't move for the rest of the show, barely blinking, her little hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. On the drive home, she announced her decision, "I'm going to be an orca trainer." Her parents laughed at first, thinking it was just a child's fantasy. But Jessica didn't let go. Every science project, every school paper, every hobby from that day forward was aimed at the sea. She joined the swim team, studied biology with a single-minded focus, and volunteered at a local aquarium where she scrubbed tanks, prepared fish, and asked endless questions about marine mammals. By the time she entered university, she was already known for her determination. She majored in marine biology, graduating near the top of her class. Professors recalled how she would stay late after lectures to discuss the latest research on cetacean intelligence or behavioral conditioning. One mentor told her about an opening for an internship at a major marine park. The competition was fierce, hundreds of applicants from around the country, but Jessica's portfolio was undeniable. Her references spoke of her discipline, her physical endurance, and her rare ability to remain calm in stressful situations. She got the job. The first time she stepped onto the slick concrete platform beside the training pool, the scent of fish strong in the air, she felt an almost electric excitement. In the water before her was a young male orca, not yet fully grown, curious but cautious. His size startled her. She knew the numbers from her studies, but seeing that much muscle and power inches away was humbling. That was not the orca who would later be her partner in the shows. Her future co-star, the one who would change her life forever, came years later, transferred from another facility far away. She first saw him on a cold, gray morning, the kind of day when the water seems darker and heavier. He was older, larger, and far less eager to interact. His history was a mix of brilliance and trouble, capable of dazzling performances, but also bouts of moodiness, even aggression. Park records, heavily sanitized for the public, noted 2 prior incidents involving trainers, both non-fatal, both downplayed as accidents. Jessica read those files, and where others saw risk, she saw challenge. She believed in the bond between human and animal, in patience and understanding. He just needs the right connection, she told her colleagues. Someone who sees him for who he is, not just what he can do. The first weeks with him were slow, almost silent. She didn't push him to perform. Instead, she sat by the pool, tossing fish without demands, speaking softly. She learned his moods, the way his breathing slowed before he dove deep, the tiny shift of his tail when he was about to surface somewhere unexpected. She studied the shape of his scars, the subtle imperfections on his smooth skin, the patterns that made him unmistakable even from a distance. It wasn't long before he began to approach her willingly. One day, he surfaced right beside her, letting her place a hand on his head. That touch, warm and strangely alive beneath the cold slickness of his skin, was a breakthrough. From that moment, their training sessions became something more. Tricks and cues were just the surface. Beneath it was a relationship that grew in trust and complexity. Audiences loved them. Their shows became the park's highlight, drawing crowds from across the country. Together, They performed daring routines, synchronized dives, breathtaking breaches, playful splashes that soaked the first rows. To the public, they were the perfect pair, beauty and power in harmony. But there were moments no one else saw. Times when he would drift to the far side of the pool, ignoring her cues. Occasions when his tail slapped the water harder than necessary, sending a spray that felt more like a warning than play. Jessica never showed concern in public, but afterward she would sit quietly in the break room, replaying the behavior in her mind. Still, she never doubted him. Not truly. She believed that every bond had rough patches, that trust could survive misunderstandings. That morning, when she stepped into the park with her coffee and cooler of fish, she carried years of memories. The little girl who stared at dolphins, the determined student, the trainer who won over the most difficult orca in the park. She didn't know that by the day's end, the same animal she had loved and defended would pull her into a world from which she would not return. But for now, she smiled. Because to her, this was still the dream she had chased her whole life. But love, in this case, would not be enough. When Jessica and the orca took the stage together, it was more than a performance. It was a display of trust so seamless it seemed choreographed by something deeper than training. To the thousands of guests who filed into the marine park each month, they looked inseparable, like two halves of the same act who could read each other's thoughts. Their shows had a rhythm, an ebb and flow that mirrored the ocean itself. Jessica would signal with a flick of her wrist, and the orca would respond instantly, a towering breach that sent water cascading over the audience, followed by a playful spin that made children squeal with delight. Then there were the quieter moments, when he would rise beside her, resting the tip of his rostrum gently against her palm, holding still while she spoke to the crowd about his intelligence, his personality, and their years together. In those moments, the stadium seemed to disappear. It was just them. Co-workers often joked that Jessica didn't need a whistle or a bucket of fish, that the orca listened to her because he wanted to, not because he had to. One trainer recalled a day when Jessica was late for a morning session. They tried running the routine without her, but the orca refused to perform, circling the pool slowly until she arrived. When she finally appeared, he surfaced right in front of her, as if to say, "Where have you been?" There were even moments off stage that felt like magic. During one private training session, a sudden rainstorm hit, the sky darkening over the pool. Jessica stayed at the edge, calling to him, and he responded not with a trick, but by lying still at the surface, letting the raindrops pepper his smooth skin as she leaned down and spoke to him in quiet tones. "You're beautiful," she told him. "You know that." She swore later that he blinked slowly, almost in understanding. But bonds like theirs, however genuine, are not without tension. The same co-workers who marveled at their connection sometimes saw flashes of defiance in the orca, a missed cue here, a delayed response there. Most of the time, Jessica smoothed it over with a smile, turning potential disruptions into playful moments for the crowd. Yet behind closed doors, she admitted that sometimes he seemed distracted, as if something invisible had his attention. There was one incident months before the tragedy that stuck in the minds of the other trainers. It was a rehearsal, with no audience in the stands. Jessica had tossed a large foam toy into the water for him to retrieve, a game they'd played countless times. He caught it easily, but instead of returning it, he clamped it between his jaws and sank to the bottom of the pool. Jessica called to him, using the release signal. He didn't budge. She tried again, louder. Still nothing. Finally, after several long minutes, he surfaced on the far side, toy still in his mouth, and tossed it violently onto the platform near her feet. Then, without waiting for a reward, he dove again, vanishing into the deep blue. She laughed it off at the time, telling the others he was just being stubborn. But in the retelling, after what happened later, that moment began to feel different, like a warning hidden in plain sight. The bond between trainer and orca is unlike any other in the animal world. It is forged not just in the hours of daily training, but in shared experiences. Medical checkups where the animal must trust the human to cause discomfort for its own good. Performances where split-second timing can mean the difference between applause and chaos. Quiet mornings before the park opens, when it's just the trainer's voice and the soft slap of the orca's tail on the water. These layers of trust are what make the shows possible. And for years, Jessica had built that trust brick by brick. Audiences couldn't get enough. Families planned trips just to see them perform. Tourists filmed entire routines on their phones, capturing the sweeping jumps, the moments when Jessica would ride on his back as he cut through the water like a living torpedo, the playful splashes that left people drenched and laughing. Children would press their faces to the glass of the underwater viewing area, watching in awe as he swam alongside her during practice, sometimes rolling to expose his white belly as if inviting a rub. What the audience didn't see was how much physical and emotional discipline went into maintaining that connection. Jessica trained daily, not just with the Orca but for herself, swimming laps, practicing her signals, studying his moods. She kept a notebook filled with observations. Asterisk seemed sluggish after morning feed. More responsive after afternoon enrichment. Asterisk every detail mattered. Every small change in behavior was a piece of the puzzle. She prided herself on her ability to read him, to know when he was ready to push harder, when he needed a break, and when something was wrong. This intuition was what set her apart from other trainers. But intuition can be a dangerous thing. It relies on patterns, and patterns can be broken. In the weeks leading up to that final performance, there were a few moments that stood out, little ripples in the routine. A late response to a cue. A refusal to swim alongside her during a particular trick. A tendency to hang motionless near the bottom of the pool between acts, staring up through the water with that unreadable gaze. Jessica noted them, but she didn't sound the alarm. The bond was still there, she thought. He was still hers. Whatever this was, it would pass. Looking back, the others wondered if maybe the signs had been there all along. Subtle, easy to miss, but building towards something inevitable. The kind of shift you don't recognize until it's too late. That afternoon, as the stands filled and the music began, Jessica would walk out to the edge of the pool once again, trusting in the bond they had built over years. The same bond that had captivated thousands. The same bond that had made them famous. The same bond that, on this day, would fail her. Looking back, that moment feels like a warning. The crowd's roar rose like a living wave, surging over the blare of music and the rhythmic clapping echoing through the stands. Jessica stood poised at the pool's edge, her wet suit gleaming under the spotlights, her smile radiant. To the audience, she looked like the picture of confidence, the star trainer, the one who could coax trust from a predator weighing more than 5 tons. Children leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide with awe, while parents held up phones to capture every second. She gave a small bow, letting the applause wash over her before raising a hand in a signal to her partner in the water. The Orca surfaced on cue, his massive head breaking through the shimmering turquoise. He exhaled a powerful spout that caught the light, sending a mist over the front row. Gasps and laughter followed, exactly the reaction she had worked for years to perfect. But beneath the surface, something was different. The Orca's movements were sharper, more deliberate. Each roll of his body seemed less like a practiced routine and more like a calculation, each glide taking him just a little farther from the choreography. Jessica's trained eyes picked up the difference instantly, but she didn't break the flow. Years of experience had taught her to adjust without showing it. A subtle flick of her wrist brought him back toward center stage. The speakers blared a swelling orchestral note as Jessica dove cleanly into the pool, slicing through the surface with barely a splash. She swam alongside him, her hand trailing just above the sleek black and white pattern of his back. The audience erupted in fresh applause when he surged upward, lifting her high into the air on his rostrum before sending her sailing into a perfect arc. She landed flawlessly, resurfacing with a grin. But in the split second before she climbed back onto the platform, her eyes locked with his, and for just a heartbeat, she saw something cold. It wasn't aggression, exactly. It was detachment. As if the bond they had nurtured for years was a thread he could choose to cut at any moment. A trainer stationed farther down the platform caught her expression. He took a step toward her, as if to say something, but the music swelled again, drowning out his voice. The next cue came, the most dangerous part of the act. Jessica would swim beneath him as he rolled to expose his belly, letting her glide along it before he spun away and performed a breach that would drench half the crowd. It was a sequence they'd done hundreds of times. She gave the signal, and the orca responded, but with a hesitation so slight the audience would never notice. She pushed the doubt aside, diving beneath his massive frame. From below, the light from above rippled and bent around him, casting strange shadows across his body. She reached out, fingertips brushing his skin, feeling the raw power coiled within every muscle. Then, instead of the smooth roll she expected, he twisted sharply. She was forced to kick hard to avoid colliding with him. When she surfaced, she hid her breathlessness behind another smile, but a murmur passed between the trainers stationed along the pool. The orca circled her again, slower this time, his eye fixed on her with an intensity she had never quite felt before. It wasn't the playful curiosity of rehearsals. It was watchful, measuring. The crowd remained oblivious, swept up in the spectacle. A child in the front row squealed with joy as the orca surfaced again, his great black fin slicing the air. Jessica's instincts were screaming now. Years of trust battled with a growing, primal sense that something was shifting beneath the polished choreography. She knew the cues, knew the risks, knew that predators, no matter how familiar, were never fully tame. She raised her hand for the next sequence, but her mind wasn't on the trick. It was on the way his body had brushed hers under the water. It hadn't been part of the routine. It had been deliberate. In the control booth, a technician glanced toward the head trainer, eyebrows raised. The head trainer shook his head slowly, eyes locked on the scene below. Jessica took a deep breath, plastered on the smile the crowd expected, and gave the signal again. The orca responded, perfectly this time. Too perfectly. It was the calm before something she couldn't yet name. She didn't know it yet, but the line between performance and danger had just been crossed. The water around her shimmered like liquid glass, each ripple catching the light from the spotlights above. Jessica's heart was pounding, but her smile, that perfect, stage-ready smile, never wavered. Years of training had taught her one unbreakable rule: never let the animal see your fear. Whether it was a dolphin refusing to follow cues or a 6-ton orca circling too close, the trainer's face had to stay calm, inviting, confident. The audience thought they were witnessing harmony, a beautiful connection between woman and beast. But beneath the surface, something older and darker was stirring. The orca surfaced again, a shadow beneath the turquoise. His eye met hers, black and unreadable, a small glint catching the arena lights. She tilted her head slightly and raised her hand in the signal for the next stunt. He didn't move. Instead, he floated, almost lazily, just beneath the surface. The silence stretched for a second too long, though the music thundered in the background. Jessica kept her hand raised, her smile fixed. The crowd couldn't know that the bond between them, so carefully built over years, was hanging by a thread. Finally, with a slow, deliberate motion, the orca sank deeper. Jessica knew what this meant. He was deciding. Orcas didn't just react, they chose. Every movement, every flick of the tail, was a calculated choice. And right now, she could feel the weight of his attention pressing against her like the deep sea. She took a shallow breath. Stay calm, she told herself. Stay with the routine. She swam to the platform, hoisted herself up, and gave the audience a wide, beaming grin, as though nothing at all was wrong. The crowd clapped and whistled, oblivious to the electric tension in the water. Behind her, the orca's dorsal fin cut through the pool in a slow, prowling circle. From her peripheral vision, she saw the head trainer near the control booth, gesturing to another staff member. Something about the set of his jaw told her he'd noticed the same thing she had. The next cue was coming, the trust dive, where Jessica would lie on the surface of the water while the orca approached from behind and, at the very last moment, lifted her gently into the air. It was the ultimate display of their bond, a stunt that made audiences gasp and trainers' hearts race for all the wrong reasons. She slid back into the water, keeping her breathing slow. The lights caught tiny droplets clinging to her hair, turning them into fleeting jewels before they fell back into the pool. She positioned herself exactly as rehearsed, her arms stretched forward, her body relaxed and motionless on the surface. Beneath her, she could feel the vibrations of his approach, a low, thrumming hum through the water, the sound of raw power gathering speed. 5 meters. 4. 3. The timing had to be perfect. In the final heartbeat before he would reach her, she expected the upward surge, the gentle lift she knew so well. But it didn't come. Instead, there was a sudden rush of water as he passed directly beneath her, his massive body skimming so close that the turbulence pulled her down. She gasped, startled, as the surface closed over her. For a moment, she couldn't tell which way was up. She kicked hard, breaking through the surface with a forced laugh for the audience, a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. The crowd cheered, thinking the near miss was part of the show. But she knew. That hadn't been a trick. That had been a warning. The orca surfaced several meters away, exhaling in a plume of spray, his great mouth slightly open. The sound was deep, resonant, almost like a growl beneath the hiss of water. His eyes stayed locked on her, unblinking. Jessica's instincts screamed again, louder this time. Every trainer knew that when an orca deviated from a routine twice in a row, the next move was unpredictable, and unpredictability in the water was deadly. She turned toward the nearest safety platform, pretending it was part of the choreography. But as she began to swim, she saw him sink beneath the surface again, vanishing into the depths of the pool. Her training told her to keep moving. Slowly, evenly. Don't thrash. Don't run. Never signal to the predator that you're prey. Halfway to the platform, the water shifted beneath her. A sudden upwelling, the telltale sign of something massive rising fast. Before she could react, he burst from the water directly beside her, his head towering above, his eye so close she could see her own reflection in it. And she smiled. It wasn't for the crowd this time. It was for him. A gesture of calm. A plea. A reminder of their years together, of the countless tricks and trust they had shared. She held his gaze and smiled as if to say, "We're still friends, aren't we?" For a moment, it seemed to work. He hovered beside her, barely moving, his great bulk casting a shadow over her body. The noise of the crowd faded into a dull hum, her whole world reduced to that single connection between human and predator. But deep inside, she knew something was slipping. He wasn't responding to her cues anymore, he was responding to her. Reading her body language, her breathing, even the subtle tremor she tried so hard to hide. She floated there, smiling at the animal who could end her life in seconds, and for the first time in her career, she wondered if he knew exactly what that smile meant. And if it made any difference at all. The audience was still buzzing, clapping in sync with the pounding music, the lights shimmering over the pool in dazzling patterns. But for Jessica, the noise felt distant, like it was muffled under a layer of water. She was too focused on the orca, on the way he was moving now, how his swim pattern no longer matched the polished routine they had drilled countless times. She told herself it wasn't the first time he'd gone slightly off script. These animals weren't machines, they were intelligent, unpredictable beings. But something about this was different. His movements were tighter, more coiled. Every dive, every turn seemed to end just a little too close to her. Still, she pressed on, determined not to let the unease seep into her performance. The show had to go on. The next sequence was meant to be a grand finale before the last splash, the kind of moment that brought people to their feet, clutching their hearts in excitement. She gave the signal. He rose from the water in a towering spy hop, his body vertical, eyes level with hers. For a moment, the crowd erupted in cheers, thinking it was all part of the act. But Jessica's breath caught. His stare wasn't playful now. It was piercing, unblinking, almost studying her. She kept her smile in place, but her pulse quickened. The orca dropped back beneath the surface, his massive tail sending a wave across the pool. She knew he would circle beneath her for the lift, the move where she would be pushed out of the water on his rostrum, balancing high above the surface before diving back in. Except he didn't lift her. Instead, something slammed into her side underwater. Not hard enough to injure her, but hard enough to throw her off balance and send her rolling in the current. She kicked to steady herself, disoriented. The orca shot past her, his tail narrowly missing her head. The crowd gasped at what they thought was a dramatic flourish. But in the trainer's corner, eyes were darting between each other, tension rippling through them. Jessica surfaced, forcing her breathing into control. This wasn't the time to panic. She was still in the pool with a predator whose mood had just shifted. Any wrong movement could escalate the situation. She turned slowly, scanning for his black dorsal fin cutting through the water. There, a dark shape gliding toward her from the far end. His approach was slower now, deliberate. She gave the signal to disengage, a subtle cue they used when an animal seemed agitated, but he didn't respond. He just kept coming. She could feel the eyes of the entire arena on her. Any sign of fear could ripple through the animal, could tip the balance. So she stayed calm, turning toward him as though this were part of the choreography. At the last second, he dove beneath her again. She felt the rush of water along her legs as he passed. Then, a tug. It was slight at first, just enough to pull her downward, but she recognized the sensation instantly. His mouth had closed gently around her foot. Not biting. Just holding. A surge of cold shot through her veins. This was not part of the act. She looked toward the edge of the pool. 2 trainers were moving quickly now, their hands signaling toward the control booth. The music didn't stop, it never stopped during a show, but she could hear muffled shouting from somewhere above. Jessica tried to kick free, gently at first. The orca didn't release her. Instead, he began to swim, pulling her with him. The audience laughed and cheered, believing it was all part of the show, the beloved trainer being playfully towed by the massive animal. But Jessica knew. She felt the shift, deep and primal. He wasn't playing. She forced herself to stay composed. She had been trained for emergency situations, drilled in protocols, told over and over that panic was the enemy. But training couldn't erase the instinctual fear blooming in her chest now. The orca dove deeper, pulling her into the cooler, dimmer water below. The filtered lights from above shimmered faintly, growing more distant. She twisted slightly, trying to make eye contact, but all she could see was the vast black and white curve of his body. Then, suddenly, he released her. Jessica kicked hard, shooting upward toward the surface. She broke through with a gasp, pulling in a lungful of air. The crowd clapped wildly, they thought it was another daring move. She scanned the water frantically. He was gone. Somewhere beneath her, circling. From the platform, a trainer shouted something she couldn't hear. Another threw a hand signal that meant, end routine now. But Jessica knew she couldn't simply swim to the edge. The orca was between her and safety. The dorsal fin appeared again, slicing the surface like a blade. He was heading straight toward her. Jessica held her position, heart hammering, forcing her body language to remain relaxed. The key was to keep control of the interaction, to guide him back to a safe behavior before things escalated further. When he reached her, she extended a hand, a gesture of trust they had repeated thousands of times. This time, he didn't slow. His massive head broke the surface inches from her, sending a wave across her chest. The sheer force of it knocked her backward. She tried to regain footing in the water, but before she could, he was gone again, diving deep. And then, the shadow returned. Larger now. Faster. He was coming from below. Jessica inhaled sharply just as he surged upward beneath her, lifting her into the air. For a split second, it looked spectacular, the triumphant lift, the trainer high above the pool. But she could feel it in the way his body moved. This wasn't careful. This wasn't controlled. It was the moment the trust broke. She hit the water hard, the sting rippling across her skin. Underneath, the orca's shape loomed again, closer this time, turning sharply to face her. In the stands, people whistled and clapped. Cameras flashed. On the platform, the other trainers knew exactly what was happening, and they knew it wasn't good. They began moving toward the emergency gates. Jessica's mind was racing. She knew the orca's history. She knew that once a predator decided to change the game, there was no forcing them back to the script. Her only hope was to keep calm, keep him engaged, and find a way to the platform without triggering the instinct she now feared was rising in him. But the water around her was silent. Too silent. She turned slowly, heart pounding. The shadow was gone. He had vanished again. And she knew, when he came back, it would be different. If you think you know how this story ends, you're wrong. What happens next will shatter everything you thought you understood about trust between human and animal. The music crashed into a final note, the crowd roaring as Jessica surfaced once more, water streaming from her hair. She raised her arms in a showman's flourish, but inside her chest, her heart pounded like a drumline. The orca was circling again, his great dorsal fin slicing the water like a blade. She was supposed to head for the platform, end the set with a wave to the audience. Instead, she held her ground in the pool. A part of her wanted to test him, to see if the unease was just in her head or if something had truly shifted. The orca slowed, eyes locking on hers. He glided closer, so close she could see her own reflection in the glossy black curve of his head. There was no sign of aggression. No thrashing, no lunging. Just stillness. And then, in a flash, his massive jaws closed gently around her forearm. The crowd gasped, but it looked playful. To them, it was a trick, another show of trust. Jessica forced a smile, willing herself to believe it too. She gave the signal for release, a quick tap to his side. He let go instantly, rolling away with a flick of his tail. The audience laughed and clapped. Jessica's fellow trainers exchanged glances. That wasn't in the script. Before she could process it, he was back. This time, the contact was quicker, a bump against her ribs that knocked her half a step sideways in the water. She recovered instantly, still smiling, still playing the part. But inside, the alarm bells were deafening now. She made for the platform, her hand just brushing the edge, and that's when it happened. The orca surged from beneath, jaws clamping around her torso with terrifying precision. The impact lifted her clear from the water for a split second before dragging her down in a violent rush. The audience screamed, the sound slicing through the music. From the stands, it still looked like a stunt, dramatic, breathtaking. But from the control booth, the head trainer's face had gone pale. Jessica was underwater now, the world above dissolving into a chaotic blur of light and sound. The orca's grip was firm but not crushing, the hold of a predator that knew exactly how much force it could apply without ending the game too soon. She kicked hard, her mind flashing through every emergency protocol she'd ever been taught. Step 1, don't panic. Step 2, maintain eye contact. Step 3, signal release. But underwater, signals were meaningless. The orca wasn't following cues anymore. He was following instinct. Her lungs began to ache as he carried her deeper, the pool's turquoise fading into a cold, oppressive blue. She could feel the immense power in his movements. Each flick of his tail propelled them with bone-jarring speed. She tried to twist free, but his grip tightened, holding her like a vice. Somewhere above, trainers were shouting into radios. The emergency gate team was moving, their hands on the levers that could drop steel barriers into the water, trapping the orca in one section. But there was no guarantee that would save her. Jessica felt the burn in her chest turn to fire. Her mind screamed for oxygen. The orca released her just enough for her to kick upward, and for a heartbeat she thought he might let her go. She broke the surface, gasping for air, and the moment her lips touched the wind, he struck again. This time his jaws closed around her leg, pulling her under so fast the sunlight vanished in a blink. The world became silence, broken only by the muffled roar of water rushing past her ears. Panic clawed at her mind, but she forced herself to focus. She could see his eye now, unblinking, locked on her as he carried her in a slow, deliberate circle. She reached out, her palm brushing his skin, a desperate reminder of the bond they had once shared. But there was no flicker of recognition, no softening. He was in control now, and she was part of his world, not the other way around. Above the surface, chaos reigned. The crowd had realized this wasn't part of the act. Children cried as parents tried to shield them from the unfolding scene. Trainers dove in with poles, whistles, and hand signals, trying to break the orca's focus. In the water, Jessica fought for every second of breath she could steal. Each time he released her, it was only to seize another part of her. Her arm, her shoulder, her leg, pulling her in an unpredictable rhythm that kept her disoriented and gasping. Her training told her he wasn't attacking out of hunger or rage. This was possession. Control. To him, she was no longer the trainer, she was the prize. Minutes stretched like hours. Her strength began to waver. Somewhere in her mind, she remembered the mantra drilled into every marine trainer's head: you can never win a battle of strength with an orca. She stopped fighting. Instead, she went limp, letting her body move with his momentum. For a moment, he seemed confused, loosening his grip just slightly. That was her opening. With the last reserves of her energy, she kicked free and shot upward. The surface shimmered above her like a fragile sheet of glass. She broke through, sucking in a ragged breath, and for a fraction of a second, she thought she might make it. But the water behind her erupted in a violent surge. He came after her with a speed that defied logic, slamming into her from below. The force sent her sprawling across the surface before she was yanked under once more. This time, the lights from above were gone completely. There was only darkness, pressure, and the slow, terrible realization that the performance had ended, and the real fight had begun. Stay with me now, because what happens next will forever change the way you look at the bond between human and animal. The show had been going for only a few minutes when the change came, subtle at first, invisible to anyone who didn't know him like Jessica did. The music thundered from the speakers, the audience clapped to the beat, and the orca sliced through the water in perfect rhythm with the trainer's cues. Jessica was kneeling at the platform's edge, one hand outstretched over the pool, smiling at him as he surfaced. The crowd loved this part, the gentle greeting, the illusion of a handshake between species. He approached slowly, head breaking the water, eyes fixed on hers. There was that glimmer she always looked for, the sign he was focused and engaged. But beneath it, something else. His movements weren't loose anymore, they were coiled. Measured. Like a spring wound too tight. Jessica felt it in the way his rostrum brushed her palm. Not the soft push she knew, but a deliberate, firmer press, as if testing her. She glanced toward the other trainer on deck, a quick flicker of unease in her eyes, but her smile never faltered for the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer boomed, "watch as Jessica and our star show just how deep their bond goes." She stood, stepping lightly onto the slippery edge, and gave the signal for the next maneuver, a high-speed pass followed by a breach. He dipped beneath the surface, his massive body disappearing into the depths. The water went still, almost unnaturally so. Seconds passed. Too many seconds. Jessica scanned the pool, her instincts screaming something was wrong. Then, a blur of black and white shot toward her from below. She braced for the familiar splash of his leap, but he didn't leap. Instead, he surged upward directly in front of her, drenching her in a burst of icy water, then sank again in a tight, sharp turn. The crowd roared with laughter, thinking it was all part of the act. But Jessica knew. This wasn't in the script. She crouched again, trying to re-establish control. "Easy, boy," she murmured, words lost in the noise of the speakers and cheering. She extended her hand. He came toward it, slow, deliberate. For a split second, she thought he was calming. She even smiled, but not for the audience. It was the hopeful smile of someone trying to talk down a friend on the edge. Then, with terrifying swiftness, he clamped his jaws around her arm. It wasn't a full bite, not yet, but a hold. Firm. Immovable. The crowd gasped, unsure if they were seeing a trick or a mistake. Jessica's other hand gripped the edge of the platform as the orca's immense strength began to pull her toward the water. She tried the release cue, tapping his head, pressing against the sensitive ridge near his jaw. Nothing. His eye, just inches from hers, was unreadable, not angry, not panicked, just fixed. Focused entirely on her. Another trainer shouted from across the pool, rushing toward the emergency signal rope, but before he could reach it, the orca gave a sudden, violent tug. Jessica was yanked off her feet, her body slamming into the water with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. The sound above faded instantly. Underwater, the world was muffled, heavy, disorienting. She opened her eyes to a haze of bubbles and motion, the orca's massive form beside her. His grip shifted from her arm to her torso, holding her in a vice of muscle and bone. He wasn't thrashing. He wasn't in a frenzy. He was in control. Completely. Jessica knew enough to understand the danger. When an orca takes you beneath the surface, it's not a game. Seconds matter. The first plunge is just the beginning. She kicked against him, reaching for the surface, but he twisted, carrying her deeper. The light above fractured into dancing ribbons, growing dimmer. Her chest ached already from the shock of the entry, the cold biting at her skin. She tried again to signal, tapping, pushing, the cues drilled into her over years of work. Nothing reached him. Up above, the crowd's cheers had collapsed into screams. Trainers were scrambling, some waving for the emergency nets, others shouting for the water gates to be lowered. But in the water, Jessica's world had narrowed to one impossible task: staying calm when every cell in her body was telling her to panic. The orca's movements slowed. He hovered in the deep with her, as if deciding what to do next. Jessica, desperate, tried to curl in close to his head, the way she'd done 100 times before, whispering through her regulatorless lips in the hope her voice might trigger recognition. Then, he let go. For half a heartbeat, she thought he'd released her entirely. Her body began to rise, buoyed by her own frantic kicks. She could see the shimmer of the surface now, close enough to taste the air she craved. And then, the water exploded around her. From below, the orca shot upward again, slamming into her with his full mass, sending her spinning in a maelstrom of foam and bubbles. She felt the searing pain in her side before she understood he'd taken her again, this time in a grip she could not break, not with any trick or signal. The show was no longer a show. It was the beginning of a fight she could not win. Don't look away now. The most chilling moment is still coming. The water closed over Jessica's head with a cold finality. For a heartbeat, there was only silence, the muffled roar of the crowd above replaced by the heavy, pressing quiet of the deep. Light fractured into ribbons that danced and dissolved as the orca pulled her further down, the surface becoming a shimmering, unreachable ceiling. Her instincts screamed to kick upward, to break free, but the strength around her was immovable. His jaws, though not crushing, locked around her arm like a steel trap, his body twisting with a power no human could match. The motion spun her violently, disorienting her sense of up and down until she no longer knew which way led to air. A trail of silver bubbles streamed from her nose and mouth, spiraling toward the light above. She could see them drift away, carrying pieces of her dwindling breath. Her chest burned, her lungs clamped in protest, but the orca's grip did not loosen. His massive eye glinted through the shifting blue, unblinking, unreadable, impossibly close. Jessica had been here before, in training drills and rehearsals. She knew how to stay calm, how to signal for help underwater. She moved her free hand toward the release signal, a frantic motion trainers used in emergencies, but the orca twisted again, dragging her in a tight arc toward the deeper section of the pool. The world tilted, light dimmed, and the cold grew sharper against her skin. Above, chaos was unfolding. Trainers on the deck sprinted for their poles and rescue lines. One threw a bright orange buoy into the pool, its fluorescent surface bobbing uselessly as the orca ignored it. Whistles shrieked in short, urgent bursts, the sound cutting across the water like an alarm. But down here, they were faint, almost ghostly. Jessica's thoughts began to fragment. She pictured her father in the audience, his hands gripping the railing, his face pale with fear. She thought of the morning's laughter, the way the sunlight had caught the ripples in the pool. She thought, briefly, of how quiet it was down here, how peaceful it would have been if not for the crushing ache in her chest. The orca released her arm, but only for a split second. His teeth found the fabric of her wetsuit at her side, pulling her downward again with terrifying precision. It wasn't a random thrash, it was deliberate, almost methodical. He turned her body sideways, pressing her against the rough texture of the pool's bottom. The scraping tore at her suit, and she felt a sting of pain along her ribs. Her mind flickered between panic and training, counting the seconds, conserving oxygen, searching for an opening to break free. She twisted her body, bracing her feet against the floor and pushing upward with every ounce of strength. For a moment, her face broke the surface. just long enough to gulp half a breath before she was yanked back under with a force that ripped the air from her lungs. This time, the descent felt endless. Her ears popped with the pressure, and the world grew darker still. The orca rolled onto his side, keeping her trapped against the warmth of his body. It was almost an embrace, but one that held no mercy. Somewhere above, a whistle blew, not the short blasts of command, but the long, sharp note that meant all hands. Trainers shouted to each other, their voices echoing off the water. The crowd had been evacuated from the front rows, their terrified screams replaced by the hollow emptiness of the stadium. Jessica's vision began to tunnel, her peripheral world shrinking to the black and white mass beside her. She locked eyes with him once more, searching for a flicker of recognition, of the years they had spent together. But there was nothing there, no malice, no kindness. Only the depthless calm of a predator in motion. Her limbs grew heavier, her body weaker. She thought of the one truth they had all learned early in their careers. When the orca decided, you had no control. Not in the water, not in the air above it, nowhere. And in that sinking moment, Jessica understood. She wasn't in charge anymore. She had never been. The surface, to the untrained eye, seemed deceptively calm in those first few seconds after Jessica disappeared beneath it. The ripples spread outward, glittering under the stadium lights. For a fleeting moment, it might have looked like part of the act, the kind of choreographed submersion that wowed crowds daily. But to the trainers, to those who had lived and worked with orcas for years, the silence above was an omen. Then the tension shattered. The first trainer on deck, Mark, a veteran who had been Jessica's mentor, dropped to his knees at the pool's edge, scanning the water like a lifeguard searching for a drowning swimmer. His whistle cut through the air in a staccato rhythm, 2 sharp blasts, pause, repeat, the signal to release the emergency nets. The other trainers moved instantly, muscle memory driving their actions. A pole with a shepherd's hook on the end slid into the water, its bright yellow shaft jerking as one trainer tried to angle it toward the orca. But the animal's bulk moved too quickly beneath the surface, weaving between the barriers of steel and rope like a phantom. Every time the pole came close, the orca twisted away, as if mocking their efforts. In the stands, the crowd shifted from murmurs to shouts. A mother pulled her child close, shielding his view. Another visitor began filming, her phone trembling in her hands. Several people shouted at the trainers, their voices rising with panic. "She's under! She's not coming up!" The stadium sound system crackled as a pre-recorded safety announcement tried to mask the chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm." But it was already too late. The audience could sense that something had gone terribly wrong. The water broke. For an instant, Jessica's head appeared, her mouth open, gasping for air. A desperate breath, half choked by water, escaped her lips before the orca surged upward beneath her. His immense head breached the surface, sending a wave crashing over the edge of the pool. The audience gasped as they saw it. Jessica's body draped sideways across his rostrum, her legs flailing, her arms striking wildly. Mark lunged forward, grabbing for her wrist. His fingertips grazed her skin, just enough for him to feel the slippery drag of water, before the orca dropped back down, taking her with him. The impact threw a spray so high that the first few rows of seats were drenched. The trainers on the opposite side of the pool had deployed the net, but it was still meters away from reaching the orca's path. He moved with an eerie, fluid grace, never panicked, never rushed, his every motion calculated. This wasn't a chaotic attack. This was something colder. On the deck, the rescue protocol split into 2 operations. One team tried to block the orca's access to the deepest section of the pool, where it would be almost impossible to retrieve Jessica, while the other scrambled to get oxygen tanks and a gurney ready. No one said it aloud, but they all knew the stakes. Every second Jessica stayed submerged was another second closer to irreversible damage. Then the whistles changed again. A long, single blast, the all-unit distress call. That signal didn't just mean trouble. It meant life or death. From the trainer's entrance, 2 more team members sprinted in, one holding a large white rescue board, the other with a rope harness designed to clip onto a trainer's belt underwater. They had trained for years in simulations, rehearsing every possible worst-case scenario. But those drills always ended with the orca cooperating, eventually releasing its grip. This was different. From the stands, the scene was becoming unbearable to watch. Several guests left in tears, unable to handle the sight of Jessica being pulled under again and again. Others leaned forward, unable to look away, morbidly transfixed by the danger unfolding below. The murmurs turned into a constant hum of dread. A sudden eruption broke the surface. The orca breached, his black and white body glistening under the lights. Jessica's torso was visible for a split second before they both crashed back down into the water, the sound echoing like a cannon shot. That image, the limp sway of her body against the animal's frame, seared itself into the minds of everyone watching. Mark threw his pole into the water again, this time jabbing it in front of the orca's path. It was a risky move, one that could agitate him further, but he was out of options. The orca slowed, his massive head turning toward the interference. That hesitation was all they needed. Two trainers slid into the water from opposite sides, their legs kicking hard as they swam toward Jessica. They didn't aim directly for her. Instead, they angled to cut off the orca's momentum, forcing him to change direction. It was a gamble, provoke him, and he might strike at them instead. For a moment, it worked. The orca loosened his grip, letting Jessica's body drift upward. One trainer reached her, wrapping an arm around her waist, signaling for the harness. But in the split second before they could clip her in, the orca lunged again, clamping down on her wetsuit near the hip and twisting with the raw force of a riptide. The trainer holding her was yanked violently forward, barely able to break free before being dragged under himself. His head broke the surface, gasping for breath, but Jessica was gone again. The crowd screamed. From the deck, the lead trainer shouted an order that carried above the chaos. "Lock down the gate." They were sealing the orca in one section of the pool, a desperate attempt to corner him. The heavy steel barrier began to lower, its chains clanking loudly. But the orca knew the space too well. Before the gate could close, he darted through, vanishing into the far end of the pool with Jessica still in his grasp. The trainers didn't stop. They repositioned, one group rushing to intercept him on the other side, another sliding the rescue board into the water. The plan now was simple: create enough of a barrier to force him to surface near the shallow end. There, maybe, they could haul Jessica out. But as they moved, one chilling reality became clearer with each passing second: they weren't rescuing a struggling swimmer anymore. They were fighting to recover someone who might already be slipping beyond their reach. And in that grim knowledge, every heartbeat felt like an hour. Every ripple on the surface felt like a countdown they could not stop. The surface shimmered somewhere far above, a trembling halo of light that mocked Jessica with its unreachable promise of air. Her body ached with every second the orca kept her below, the water squeezing in around her chest like an invisible vice. She could feel her pulse in her ears, a deep, thudding drum that grew slower, heavier, as the seconds dragged on. 4 years, Jessica had trained for emergencies. She knew how to remain calm under pressure, how to conserve oxygen, how to think with clarity when panic clawed at the edges of her mind. But this wasn't a drill. This wasn't a miscommunication or a brief, accidental pull. The animal she had fed, spoken to, laughed with, the one she had trusted with her life, was holding her here with unrelenting intent. Her arm throbbed where his teeth had gripped her earlier, and every twist of his powerful body felt like it might tear her from her own skin. She kicked hard, but her feet found only the vast emptiness of the pool. Every escape route dissolved as quickly as she imagined it. Above, shapes moved frantically along the pool's edge, trainers leaning out with poles, hands waving in rapid, desperate signals. The safety net team had arrived, tossing long rescue ropes into the water, but the orca ignored every distraction. His focus was absolute. A sudden jolt tore through her, not pain exactly, but a shocking pull that sent her tumbling forward. The orca had released her completely for the first time in what felt like minutes. Her instincts screamed swim. She kicked toward the light, her arms cutting through the water with burning speed. 3 feet. 2 feet. A shadow swept beneath her. In a blur of black and white, he surged upward, ramming her from below with a force so violent that it knocked the last breath from her lungs. The impact sent a sharp flash of pain through her ribs and spun her in a dizzying spiral. She had no sense of where the surface was anymore. The world became a whirlpool of bubbles and confusion. Her eyes stung from the chlorine, but she caught glimpses of him circling, slow, deliberate, as if studying her reaction. Each pass brought him closer, until she could feel the rush of water from his massive flukes against her face. Somewhere deep inside, a thought pierced through the chaos: he's not done. Jessica forced herself to stop thrashing. She went limp, her body floating in the water like a rag doll. It was risky. In training, they had sometimes been told to go still, to give the animal nothing to fight against, nothing to resist. But the gamble came with no guarantees. The orca paused. His head tilted, one dark, glassy eye locking on hers. For a heartbeat, the water between them felt alive with something unspoken, not forgiveness, not malice, but a kind of ancient recognition. Then, with terrifying speed, he lunged again, his jaws closing around her waist. The pressure was immense, not bone-crushing yet, but firm enough to remind her how fragile she was in his world. He swam upward at an angle, carrying her toward the surface, and for a fleeting moment, hope ignited in her chest. Air. But at the very last second, he turned sharply and plunged down again, deeper than before. The cold intensified, slicing into her skin. Her lungs were screaming now, her vision spotted with black flecks that danced and expanded with every second. On the pool deck, the trainers were shouting over each other. Two had moved into wetsuits, preparing to enter the water for a direct intervention. The audience, though partially evacuated, still pressed against the upper railings, their faces pale with shock. Some held their phones, recording the nightmare unfolding below. Jessica's body trembled with exhaustion. Her muscles felt like lead, her thoughts slow and fragmented. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep her mind tethered to the idea of survival. And yet, in the fading edges of her consciousness, she thought of something oddly clear. She remembered her very first show. The way she had stood on that same platform years ago, the crowd cheering, the orca beside her. How she had smiled, truly smiled, believing they understood each other. And now, here they were. The same pool. The same performer. But a different ending. The orca's grip shifted slightly, and for an instant, she thought he might let go. She tried to push away, but he clamped down again, drawing her deeper until the pool's bottom loomed beneath them like a vast, empty plain. Her chest burned so violently now it felt like her ribs might burst. The urge to breathe, to inhale anything, even water, was unbearable. Her body betrayed her, sucking in a desperate gasp. Water flooded her lungs. The shock was instant, brutal. Her body convulsed, her vision exploding in a burst of white, then narrowing to a tunnel of fading light. Through that narrowing view, she saw him one last time, gliding beside her with silent power. And as the darkness closed in, she felt an odd calm, not peace exactly, but the kind of surrender that comes when there's nothing left to fight. Somewhere above, the trainers hit the water. But Jessica was already slipping beyond their reach. The water's weight felt infinite now, pressing down on Jessica from every direction. It wasn't just her lungs, her whole body seemed to reject the idea of movement. Her arms floated weakly at her sides, her legs barely twitching. The rush of the pool, the shouts from above, even the rhythmic sweep of the orca's tail, all blurred into a muffled hum. Two rescue divers broke the surface above, their black wetsuits glistening as they plunged down toward her. Their fins cut clean arcs through the water, bubbles streaming from their regulators in a frantic silver trail. They were fast, far faster than she could have hoped to be in her state, but not fast enough to erase the chilling reality that the orca still had her. The massive animal shifted, its jaws loosening slightly around her torso. The moment felt like a door cracking open. The divers closed in, one reaching out with a gloved hand, fingertips brushing her arm. And then, in a burst of speed that made the water churn like a storm, the orca dove again, dragging her with him in a twisting spiral toward the deepest point of the pool. The divers followed, but the sheer force of his movement created a vortex that pushed them back, their hands clawing at empty water. Jessica's mind flickered between two competing instincts, fight and yield. Her training screamed don't struggle, but the primal part of her brain begged her to thrash, to kick, to claw her way back toward the surface light that shimmered faintly above. Yet even as she considered it, her muscles refused. The oxygen debt was too deep, her body too starved to answer the command. The orca's grip wasn't crushing, not yet. It was almost controlled. But that control carried its own kind of horror. He wasn't acting out of desperation or fear. He was choosing this. Her eyes half closed, and strange, dreamlike images began to drift across her mind. She saw her father standing at the edge of a lake, teaching her how to swim when she was just a child. She saw the day she first signed her contract at the marine park, pen trembling in her hand as she imagined the years ahead. She saw herself laughing during rehearsals, drenched in salt water, believing this was her calling. The divers regrouped above, one signaling frantically to the other. A long metal pole extended downward, the end fitted with a quick-release loop. It was the last tool they had, a way to hook the orca's jaw and force him to release. But using it meant taking a risk they'd both been trained to avoid, angering a 12,000-pound predator in close quarters. One diver plunged, loop in hand, angling toward the orca's lower jaw. The animal noticed immediately, twisting his massive body to shield Jessica from the attempt. The second diver flanked from the opposite side, their movements sharp and precise, trying to distract him. For a moment, the orca released her, not to free her, but to lunge at the incoming threat. The movement spun her sideways, and her vision swam in dizzy circles. She could almost feel herself floating upward, as if her body knew the fight was ending. The first diver seized the chance, slipping the loop over part of the orca's mouth and yanking hard. The animal thrashed violently, a booming thud reverberating through the water as his tail struck the pool wall. The shockwave rattled through Jessica's bones. And then, silence. The orca slipped free of the loop and darted away into the opposite end of the pool, vanishing into the shadowed depths. Jessica drifted, her arms spreading out like wings, her hair swirling around her face. The divers surged toward her, one catching her under the arms while the other pushed from behind. The ascent felt impossibly long, every inch an uphill battle against the pull of the deep. Her head broke the surface in a violent splash. Air roared into her lungs in ragged, coughing gasps as the divers hauled her toward the platform. Trainers swarmed in, grabbing her shoulders, her legs, lifting her onto solid ground. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, the blinding stage lights overhead making her squint. She could hear voices, shouting, urgent, but they seemed far away, like echoes bouncing off a tunnel wall. As medics knelt beside her, one pressing a hand to her chest, another fitting an oxygen mask over her mouth, she caught a final glimpse of the water. The orca had resurfaced. He floated near the far wall, utterly still, his black and white form gleaming under the stadium lights. His gaze was fixed on her. Not triumphant. Not remorseful. Just watching. And for the briefest moment before her vision went dark again, Jessica had the unsettling sense that this was not the end, only a pause. The stadium had fallen into a tense, unnatural stillness. The crowd that had been cheering minutes earlier now sat in frozen silence, some with hands clamped over their mouths, others whispering to one another in disbelief. Children clung to their parents, eyes wide, sensing the magnitude of something they didn't fully understand. Medics worked in a blur around Jessica's still form. One called for more oxygen, another prepared a defibrillator, just in case. Every second felt stretched thin, drawn out like a thread pulled to the breaking point. Someone shouted for the park's emergency curtains to be drawn, and heavy white partitions began sliding into place, shielding the scene from public view. The cheers and music that had filled the arena moments earlier were gone, now replaced with the steady beeping of medical equipment and the low hum of hushed voices. From behind those curtains, the orca moved again. He glided slowly through the water, his immense dorsal fin slicing the surface like a blade. There was no thrashing now, no violence, only the eerie calm of an apex predator who knew the game had changed. Trainers at the far side of the pool stood ready with buckets of fish, hoping to lure him into a separate holding pen. But he didn't come. He hovered near the spot where Jessica had been pulled from the water, circling it, as if retracing the moment in his mind. Jessica's eyelids fluttered open briefly. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths under the oxygen mask. Her eyes darted toward the pool for the briefest instant, as though she had to confirm, had to see for herself, that he was still there. When she did, her body tensed ever so slightly. The lead medic leaned close. "Stay with us, Jessica. You're okay. Just focus on my voice." But she wasn't okay, not in the way they meant. She was alive, yes, but something deep in her spirit had shifted. That look in the Orca's eyes in those final moments under the water had branded itself into her memory. It wasn't pure aggression, nor was it curiosity. It was deliberate. And the worst part was that she didn't know what it meant. The paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher and wheeled her toward the back of the stadium where an ambulance waited. The sound of the gurney wheels on the concrete was loud in the silence, each clattering echo a reminder that this was no longer a show, this was survival. As she was loaded into the ambulance, one of the trainers, her closest colleague, Mark, caught her hand. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "He's never done that before," he said, almost as if he was trying to convince himself. "Never." Jessica wanted to answer, but her voice was barely more than a whisper under the mask. "He was trying to tell me something." Mark frowned, unsure whether it was the lack of oxygen talking or if she truly believed it. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the sirens wailed to life. The stadium, the pool, the watching eyes of the Orca, all of it fell away as they sped toward the nearest trauma center. Hours passed. Tests were run. X-rays revealed deep bruising across her ribs, but nothing broken. Her oxygen levels were dangerously low at first, but they stabilized with treatment. The doctors told her she was lucky. Most people in her position didn't make it to the surface in time. But Jessica didn't feel lucky. She couldn't stop replaying the event in her mind. The pull beneath the surface. The spiraling dive. The exact moment his jaw loosened and she could have escaped, but didn't. It was as if the Orca had been testing boundaries, watching her response. Not hunting. Not protecting. Studying. News of the incident spread like wildfire. By evening, every major network was running the footage. Heavily edited, of course, since the park had quickly locked down the raw recordings. Commentators debated whether the attack was provoked, whether captivity itself was to blame, or whether it was just a tragic accident in an inherently dangerous job. Activists seized the moment, calling for the immediate release of the park's orcas. They cited decades of research on how intelligent, social, and emotionally complex these animals were, and how confinement could lead to unpredictable behavior. On social media, hashtags like #FreeTheOrcas and #JusticeForJessica began trending. The marine park's management scrambled to contain the fallout. Their official statement framed the incident as an unfortunate accident during a complex routine with one of our beloved orcas. They stressed Jessica's skill and bravery, but they avoided addressing whether the animal would be removed from shows. Behind closed doors, meetings ran late into the night as they weighed the legal, financial, and PR risks. Jessica was released from the hospital after 3 days, though the bruises would take weeks to fade. Physically, she could recover. Emotionally, the wounds ran deeper. She returned home to find reporters camped outside her building. Questions flew at her from every angle. Do you blame the Orca? Will you go back to performing? Do you think orcas should be in captivity? She said nothing, slipping quietly inside. That night, she dreamed she was back in the water. In the dream, the Orca swam alongside her, not attacking, not fleeing, just watching her with those same dark, unreadable eyes. She woke in a cold sweat, her heart pounding. Days turned into weeks. The park called her multiple times, urging her to return for a press conference to share her positive experience and reassure the public. She refused every time. She wasn't ready, and she wasn't sure she ever would be. Instead, she began researching. She read scientific studies on orca cognition, dove into first-hand accounts from former trainers, and watched documentary footage she'd once avoided. The more she learned, the more she understood. What happened in that pool wasn't random. Orcas in the wild rarely attacked humans. In captivity, however, there had been dozens of incidents, many eerily similar to hers. It was a revelation that turned her unease into resolve. Months later, Jessica stood not on a performance stage, but at the podium of a marine conservation conference. The room was packed with scientists, activists, journalists, and ordinary people curious to hear her speak. "I spent years believing I understood these animals," she began, her voice steady. "I believed my training, my bond, and my respect for them kept me, and them, safe. But what happened that day showed me something I can't unsee. These are not props. They are not entertainers. They are sentient, emotional beings whose needs go far beyond what a concrete tank can provide." She went on to detail her experience, weaving it with the facts she'd uncovered in her research. She didn't embellish the fear she'd felt. She didn't sugarcoat the reality of captivity. By the time she finished, the room was silent, not out of doubt, but out of the weight of her words. The speech went viral. Media outlets replayed clips for weeks. Donations to conservation groups surged. And slowly, the conversation around captive marine mammals began to shift. The orca that had pulled her under was eventually moved to a larger, off-show facility. Officially, it was for rest and rehabilitation. Unofficially, it was to prevent further public relations disasters. Jessica visited him once, months later. He was calmer there, in a quieter pool, but when she approached the glass, he came right up to it, pressing his rostrum against the barrier. They locked eyes again. She didn't feel fear this time, only a strange, unspoken acknowledgement. She placed her palm against the glass. He lingered for a moment, then swam away, disappearing into the deeper water. It was the last time she saw him. Years later, when people asked Jessica why she left her career as a trainer, she would tell them the truth. "Because I finally understood the cost. Not just to me, but to them." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had looked into the eyes of a predator, and seen not just danger, but intelligence, will, and perhaps even something like understanding. Her story would become a turning point in the debate over marine captivity, a cautionary tale not of villainy, but of the unpredictable space between two worlds, the human and the wild. And though she no longer performed, the memory of that day never fully left her. Sometimes, late at night, she'd still hear the rush of water in her ears, still see the shimmer of light from above, still feel the moment when she realized the orca had chosen to let go. It was a gift, and a warning. One she would spend the rest of her life trying to honor.